Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. This is going to be part 12 of the story and the final part of the story, and I cannot tell you how relieved I am that this is the last part I have to film. I will say, as hard as this has been to film, I am happy that I went through the process of doing this. I feel like if I tried to do this later on down the road, I wouldn't be able to, and it would be very difficult because as it is, it's hard to remember all of the details. But it definitely has been helping me process everything that we went through. And it's also just been good to have in general, because even since we've been back, there are many people, friends and family, that still don't know the story or know the whole story. And we've been able to refer them to these videos so that they can find out the story this way, instead of myself or anyone from my family or extended family having to go through the process of reliving it and telling the story. So I'm grateful that I have these videos in that aspect as well. Okay, so I ended off part 11 on day 63, which is a Saturday, where I got the note from my husband that they had taken new mugshots and asked for his birthday, and that he told me that that's exactly what happened to Greg before he got out. So again, a very exciting day. Day 64 was the Sunday. Not much went on that day. I'm not gonna lie, I had hopes that maybe he'd get out that day, because apparently Greg got out the next day. So I was hopeful, but knowing it was a Sunday, I wasn't too hopeful. At this time, we were still very much packing up the house, getting the house ready for sale. My mother-in-law was doing so much. We would go through room by room, because again, I'm still recovering from surgery at this point, so I had limited energy. So I would kind of be deciding, what stuff would be packing and coming home with us, and what stuff we'd be trying to sell, what stuff we would be donating, that whole process. And then just like cleaning as well. She was doing so much cleaning and just getting our house show ready. Monday, day 65, I again woke up with all the hopes in the world that my husband would get out that day, and I had my phone glued to me. I always had my phone glued to me, but I really had my phone glued to me that day, because I really thought that this would be the day that he would get out. But again, we were just trying to keep ourselves busy around the house. We also had to go get cat paperwork for our cats to fly, because at this point we had booked flights for myself and my mother-in-law to fly home if my husband didn't get out of jail. They were the following week, those flights, so they were coming up quickly. But either way, even if he did get out, we had to have paperwork in order for our cats to fly, and the paperwork took a week in order to receive it. So we brought all 3 cats to the vet, and they had to get checks and shots and a bunch of different things, and we got that paperwork underway. Unfortunately, on that Monday, nothing happened in my husband's case. I have 0 notes, so nothing from my lawyer, nothing from the embassy, nothing from the police station, nothing happened that day. And like I've been saying, time just kept slowing down. So yeah, that was Monday. Tuesday, day 66, my friend Nicole said no news on this judge or anything, and I said nothing. It was at this point that I was telling her more about my medical issues, and specifically my mucus issue that I was talking about earlier on in the hospital. Again, it's not something I like to talk about because I feel like it's gross, but the issue I talked about, the mucus issue back in the hospital, I think I'm 5 weeks post-op at this point, over the 5 weeks, it progressively became worse. So in the beginning, it would just happen, every few days. It was nothing that worried me. Again, my doctor had told me that it was completely normal, and I didn't think anything of it. But I think specifically in this past week leading up to this day, it was becoming more frequent, more intense. I wouldn't say necessarily painful, just like a extreme level of discomfort, extremely urgent, extremely frequent. I think I had reached out to my doctor at this point. I don't have it on this day, but I know I reached out to him at one point and just asked about it. And again, he just told me that it was normal. But this was the beginning of when I was starting to feel like, I don't think this is normal. Okay, so later on that day, I got a text message from my lawyer, Michelle, and this is translated from Spanish. And it was sent to both me and Nathan from the embassy. So, Allison and Nathan, hello, just a message for both of you. I just spoke with the prosecutor on the case. He tells me that today he met with his boss and that she told him that the preparation of the file was by order of the Attorney General because they are just waiting for the signal. Order from the presidency. That the hearing will take place at any moment and they do not want to delay. That is why they have the file ready. Nathan, it would be good if the embassy insisted. So this is the first time I heard anything about the president, and I questioned her back and I said, are we just waiting on the president to approve? And she said, apparently it's approved. I'm sure they're seeing who they put as a judge to do it. I remember going as fast as I could down the hall to my in-laws' bedroom, because again, they were staying at our house with us, when I got this text message, and reading it to them, and we were all just excited and in shock because this seemed really promising, but at the same time we had just kept hearing different things that were promising this whole time. So we were almost scared to be excited, if that makes sense. Again, we hadn't heard anything about the president before or about things actually being approved, but nonetheless it was a very exciting text message to hear, because again, this is the Tuesday and his mugshot was taken on Saturday, and we were just waiting day after day, and this was the first update that we had. Okay, so now we're on to Wednesday, day 67, and again, it's a very long voice memo to my friend, and I'm just reading through it. I'm starting off pretty down because, again, we heard that exciting news yesterday, but we had heard nothing at this point. I was talking more about the medical issue that I was having and my concerns about that. I did have positive news, so I guess my order from Amazon with the ostomy bags, the convex ones I was waiting for, had arrived. And it's the first time that I went an extended period of time with one bag without it leaking, so that was super exciting. I said I did get to see Harrison today because it was visitation day. We got 20 minutes together. Okay, so I'm also telling her about a call that I had with Nathan from the embassy that morning. I called to ask him if the foreign ministry ever replied, because again, the previous week is when they accepted the paperwork, and we were just waiting on their reply, and he said that it was a holiday and they probably weren't going to work till Monday, and this was Wednesday and we still hadn't heard anything, so I was just checking in on that situation. He basically told me that he hadn't heard anything and that he would be calling me back later that afternoon. But this was also when I was starting to realize that these two plans or things in motion were separate. I wasn't sure if it was the foreign ministry receiving the paperwork that pushed to have his file released, or what my lawyer Michelle was saying about the president approving things. I wasn't sure if those two were connected, but by talking to my lawyer and Nathan at the embassy, I was realizing that these were two separate things happening simultaneously. I'm thinking the way that the president got involved was because of the letters that both myself and my mother-in-law were sending to somebody high up in the government. But again, as you'll see at the end of the story, it's very confusing, and we still to this day don't really know how everything exactly played out. But nonetheless, that course of action was happening, and we were waiting on the foreign ministry because that was another possible way that they could send a judge. I can tell that I was really not doing well in this voice memo. I said what I don't understand is why they pulled his file and they took his mugshot and all that preparation for letting him out, and then nothing. Like, that doesn't make any sense to me. Greg and my lawyer keep telling me that they think it's close, but it just doesn't make any sense. So it's really hard to go day after day being hopeful with nothing happening. I said, and now we're getting closer to a weekend again, and then next week is my flight. Basically, I had booked this flight before we ever heard that his file was pulled, and the flight was coming up the next week, but now things were seeming like we were really close to getting my husband out, so I was at a loss at this point. I didn't know if I should cancel the flights. I didn't know what to do. Also in this same voice memo, I was talking about the media, so I was hearing from my aunt that the reporter was getting antsy on the case. And everyone was concerned that they were going to post the story about my husband without actually having our consent or interviewing us. The reporter basically asked if I would be interested in doing an interview once I flew home and got off the plane. So if I took those flights the following week and my husband was still in jail, if she could come to the airport and interview me. And I was just totally freaked out about that idea. The last thing I could ever imagine was being in an interview, especially during this traumatic time, and I didn't want to do it at all. I didn't want to do anything related to the media, but the thought of them posting something without us saying it was okay, especially the fact that my husband was still in jail, just really freaked me out. So there's a lot in this voice memo basically about my fears about the media. Okay, and then I'm talking about my mucus issue again. Sorry, this is jumping all over the place, but that is just where my brain was at this point. I was just not doing well, and I was just, when I had the chance, trying to ramble off everything that I could, so that I could update Nicole. And so I was jumping back to that, and I think I had been doing a lot of research and realizing at that point that I was pretty sure, again, because I still had the rectum part left after the surgery. From the research I had done, I was pretty sure that it was that part that was in me that still had ulcerative colitis. And again, I can get into this in more detail at a later time, but I was pretty confident that that was flaring, that the ulcerative colitis wasn't gone and that it was still in my rectum and that I would need that removed. And I was just, again, freaking out because I certainly didn't want to go through another surgery in Nicaragua, and yet I didn't have insurance coverage here in Canada yet. So I was talking a lot about that. I was also talking about how I was going to meet with a rental agency the next day, just in case our house didn't sell right away, because typically in Nicaragua, real estate moves a lot slower than in North America. So that was our backup plan. If our house didn't sell, then we were going to have it as a rental. So I was going to meet with them. Okay, so that was Wednesday. We're now on Thursday, day 68. I have no updates written down. I think I was just in a really bad mental space because, again, I couldn't understand why everything had been pulled, but nothing was happening. But I know that I did have a call with Nathan from the embassy that day. That's when I found out that the foreign ministry did finally reply to receiving our mediation paperwork, and that there would be a meeting that evening at 5 p.m. between the embassy and the foreign ministry. I remember that being an extremely long and difficult day because nothing was going on all day. I knew that the meeting was going to happen that night, but I didn't know the outcome. I knew I wouldn't find out the outcome till the next day. I tried to visit my husband that day, and it had seemed that over the past couple weeks, every time I tried to visit him, it was getting more and more difficult. Even though we had had that approval to see each other every 2 days, there was just, the guards were being almost like on a power trip. I don't really know how to explain it, because again, they had been really nice to me at some points, but over this past probably week or two, every time I went in there, it got more and more challenging, and they just flat out denied me and basically didn't care what the embassy had to say. They were like, you're not going to see your husband, and it was just a really hard day. Okay, so now we're on Friday, day 69, which is June 7th. And again, I woke up that morning thinking that I would just be waiting to hear from Nathan from the embassy about how the meeting went at the foreign ministry the night before. But I woke up at 5 a.m. to a ton of messages from Michelle, my lawyer. These messages had come in prior to 5 a.m. and what she was telling me was basically the day prior, she had been at the hospital. She had a friend having an emergency C-section, and she was with them all day, and she had her phone off. And when she got home and turned her phone back on is when she realized that people were trying to get a hold of her. Again, I don't know if it's the DA or who it was that was trying to get a hold of her, but they were telling her that a judge was coming to town, and this was on the Thursday. They were trying to get a hold of her. So when she only saw it on the Friday, she freaked out and replied to them and replied to me as well. She basically said a judge was coming. She doesn't know if it was today, the Friday, or the next day, Saturday, but things were happening and that we needed to meet at the police station. Almost immediately after, Greg was messaging me as well, because I guess she told him, and it was crazy. That morning was so chaotic. Those messages started at 5 a.m. and the plans changed on what we were going to do like 10 times between 5 a.m. and 8 a.m. We were going to meet at different times at the police station, or we were going to meet at the courthouse. I don't even remember all the details, but at 7:40, I have written down that at 7:40, the plans changed and Greg told me to be at the police station by 8. So I quickly got in the car with my father-in-law and my mother-in-law, and we headed straight to the police station. So Greg ended up meeting us there, and he was basically like, let's try and tell Harrison, let's try and see if we can meet with him to tell him what's going on, because I guess, you know, there was no judge there yet, and my lawyer wasn't even there yet, so he just wanted to see if we could talk to my husband, and we went in the police station. And he asked the guard, and she, of course, said no. But then shortly after, the police chief from Rivas, the next town over, showed up at this police station in our town. And that's the first time I've ever seen him at this police station. Apparently, he was there for a completely unrelated issue. But because we had met with him before, and Greg had met with him as well, he decided to ask the guard after a period of time if he could talk to the police chief and see if the police chief would let us see my husband. I don't know how many times I can say thank goodness for Greg. Thank goodness for Greg and Hannah. Thank goodness for so many people, but he had some pull, and she listened, and she went and got him, and Greg spoke to that police chief, and he said, yeah, go ahead, you can talk to your husband. And they brought him out to like the main lobby area. I ended up being able to sit with him for like over an hour that morning. Of course, I told him what was happening within like the first 2 minutes, and I still wasn't sure what was happening at this point. I didn't know if the judge was coming today. I didn't know if the judge was coming tomorrow. I just knew that it was very exciting news and that everyone was telling me to be ready and get ready. And so anyways, after that hour and a bit went by, they took him back, and that's when Greg said we need to head to the courthouse. So when we got to the courthouse, which again is in our town, my lawyer Michelle had picked up the mother of the man who passed away, and she was there as well. And Hannah met us there as well. And again, my in-laws were there too. So we were just kind of like a big group in the courthouse, and we were standing around waiting for a while. And after a period in time, my lawyer just asked that anybody who didn't need to be there kind of went and sat in their car because it just seemed like a lot of people. So at that point, it was myself and the mother and just my lawyer, Michelle. And again, I didn't understand anything that was happening. We were just sitting outside of the courthouse, and we sat there for a very long time, but an hour, maybe 2 hours. I don't know. I didn't know what we were waiting for, if it was the judge. I didn't know anything that was happening, but it seemed very hopeful. And as time went on, again, I wasn't able to sit for a very long period of time, so I ended up going to sit in Greg's car. His car was parked right by the entrance of the courthouse, and I remember like reclining his seat and just kind of waiting there. And then at different points, different people were walking into the courthouse area. And Michelle, my lawyer, was giving Greg and I updates because, again, she was down there in that area as to who these people were and like what was happening. I never actually saw the judge arrive at this point, but I know that the lady from Revis, this is the lady who blocked us 3 separate times on actually finishing this mediation. I know that she showed up, and also another representative from our town, she showed up as well. I kept sitting there waiting for them to call me in because I assumed that we'd be going in the courthouse. I assumed that the judge would be there and that we would be signing things. Like, I didn't really understand what was happening, but again, we were there for hours. And then eventually my lawyer came out and she said, okay, we all need to go to the police station. I'm trying to do this off memory, but I also have a very long voice memo, so I'm trying to make sure that I don't miss anything. But again, still didn't really understand what was happening, but went back to the police station. And we sat inside the police station for a long time. It was at this point that we found out we were waiting for the judge to actually show up. And it felt not real. Like it didn't feel like that was actually happening. I didn't feel excited. Like, I felt hopeful, but I felt kind of numb in a weird way. And because I didn't believe after all of this that it was actually happening. But again, we were there for hours and I was not doing well. So again, I went back out to Greg's car and I was laying down in his car, and eventually Michelle, the lawyer, came out as well because she hadn't slept the entire night before because, again, she had been at the hospital. And we were well into the afternoon by this point. And so I remember her sleeping in the car beside me and I was just laying in the car. And after a very long time, I saw somebody walk into the police station, and I just thought that could be the judge. And that is when Greg messaged me, like, come in right away. And I woke up Michelle, the lawyer, and it was the judge. We went straight into the police station. So I'm jumping kind of now to my husband's perspective at this point. It's at this point that they brought paperwork back for him to sign, and he remembers signing the paperwork and then asking the police officer, because he was still in his jail cell, asking the police officer if this meant that he was getting out, and the police officer said probably 3 to 5 days. And my husband obviously was super disappointed because he thought, again, I had told him that maybe he would get out this day, but the police officer was like, no, this is just part of the process. It'll be another 3 to 5 days. I also found out after the fact that this was the mediation paperwork that was signed by the judge, and what was taking so long is that the judge was actually rewriting the mediation paperwork to not include the sum of money that we paid to the family, because again, it was a large sum of money and it's something that is not typical, and they ended up not wanting it on record, which again, we found out later, but I wanted to add it to this part of the story. So they were rewriting all the paperwork, and the judge signed it and brought it in for Harrison to sign. And again, we're all still in the police station, not knowing what was going to happen at all. After some more time went by, a police officer grabbed the keys from the drawer, which I had seen happen many, many times before. That's when I knew that they were letting him out. And my mother-in-law was behind me, and I remember her grabbing onto my shoulders, and she started to cry. And I remember still not believing that this was real at all. Like, I just thought maybe they were bringing him out to like meet with the judge. I didn't think he was actually getting out. And I remember watching up on the camera as my husband was collecting the few belongings that he had, and I went completely numb. But shortly after is when they walked him into the lobby where we were all waiting, and I just gave him the biggest hug. And again, I still didn't know if he was actually out or if he was just there to sign something. And I whispered in his ear, I said, "Are you out?" And he said, "I'm out." They let me out, and I thought at that point I would have just broke down and cried or been like so relieved or overjoyed. I expected some sort of emotion, and I had zero emotion. I was just in shock, I think, and I was completely numb. And I just remember hanging on to him and holding him. And then he ended up hugging his mom and dad, and we actually have a video clip of this. I didn't know it was being taken at the time, but Greg was behind us and took a video of our reunion. At this point, I let my husband know that the mother of the man who passed away was there. She was still with us in the police station, and of course he hadn't been able to speak to her at any point in this process. And him and Greg went over there, and they had a short conversation with her, and Greg was translating, and he was just giving his condolences. I think honestly that it was just so much emotion that I didn't know how to process it. And I think he was very much the same as well, still somewhat in disbelief and still somewhat numb, and we were just in a state of shock. So after that, we were in the police station for a little while longer because they still had some of his belongings. They still had his driver's license, they still had his passport, a bunch of things, and they were looking for it in the police station, and they weren't able to find it at this police station, and were letting us know about that it might be in Revis, basically. So anyways, once that was done, we left the police station, and again, I can't describe the surreal feeling that it was. We said goodbye and thank you to Michelle, my lawyer, and Greg and Hannah, and the mother as well, and we were all just standing in the parking lot of the police station. And that's when I remember a car pulling up, because the police station was on a pretty main road, and someone just happened to be driving by at the point in time that we were standing in the parking lot. And it was Brian's wife. She happened to be driving by, and she just parked right there and then. And I have vivid memories of this. And she jumped out of the car, and she was like, "Are you out? Are you out?" And we were like, "Yeah, he's free. He's out." And she just came over and cried, and we were all just, again, like, it didn't feel real. And very shortly after that, somebody else stopped by, and they also happened to be driving by, and it was my neighbor who started the food train, and she saw us out there, and she saw Brian's wife out there as well. And again, she jumped out and said the same thing, like, "Are you out? Are you out?" And he's like, "I'm out." And it was very crazy and surreal and emotional, and yeah. That was the moment that we got in the car and drove back home. Also in this car ride is when he was telling us about how the police officer, when he signed, said it would be another 3 to 5 days, so that he was completely in shock that he was even out, and it was just another lie from the police, because the police very much knew that he was about to get out. And so that was crazy to hear. When we got home, I remember one of the first things he wanted to do was have a shower, because of course there's no shower, and he hadn't had a shower in over 2 months. And so he was in there doing that, and I think it's at that point that I called my mom and told her, and she was over the moon, because I wasn't texting anybody during this process. I wasn't texting even my friend Nicole or telling anybody, because we had our hopes up so many times in the past, and I didn't know if this would just be another day that, you know, maybe the judge will come the next day. So nobody knew. And I ended up calling my friend next, and also telling my other friend who worked at the ostomy clinic, and it was just so amazing. So yeah, I think I'm going to keep going on what happened between then and you know, when we ended up flying back to Canada, because there's so much that went on. I'll just give you the short version of everything, but we found out that his passport was indeed in Rebus, and that it would have to be picked up the next day. We very much needed that, because that night we ended up switching our flights. So my flights were the following week with my mother-in-law on the Thursday, and we ended up moving up the flights and then adding my father-in-law and Harrison as well, so that we were all to fly home on the Tuesday. So he got out on a Friday night and our flights were on the Tuesday morning. We ended up calling our kids that night, and I wish there was some way I could have screen recorded that, because it was just the most emotional phone call, because I started the FaceTime just myself on the phone, like I always did, because I had had communication with them this entire time. And I just said, hi, like checking in, how are you doing? And then I turned the camera to him, because again, they had no idea. And the tears, it was just, I wish I had that basically to look back on. It was an amazing phone call. Basically, over the next 3 days, we knew we had a lot to do, because my mother-in-law and I had packed up the majority of the house, but we had left kitchen stuff for my husband, because he's very much the kitchen guy, and then all his work stuff and computers and whatnot, and his own clothing as well. So he only had 3 days of getting out to figure out what was coming and what we were leaving behind and actually pack it all. That evening, the same evening he got out, was also the first point in time that I started going through these notes with him, the notes that I have been going off of for this entire series, because again, when I saw him, it was in such short windows of time, and there was no way that I could fill him in this entire story as things were happening. So I always knew that when he got out, I wanted to go through this whole story with him, so he knew start to finish everything that actually happened. And we actually did that. I think it took almost 2 weeks. Every evening I would go over a little bit more of the story, and it was crazy, especially that beginning part with the corrupt lawyers. Like he knew very little about that, and I remember him being very obviously angry about that situation. And I'll probably get into that maybe later, or maybe in another video. But yeah, I was basically filling him in on everything that had happened. The next day, we did end up going to the police station in Revis, and they did have his passport and his driver's license, thank goodness, because our flights were on Tuesday. So I remember that being super stressful, but they did have it, which was good. This is also the day that we found out that there was a family who was interested in our home, because the realtor at this point was starting just like word of mouth, letting people know, and other people as well knew that we would be selling our house, and there was a family that was interested in viewing it. And I remember asking that they just view it after we leave, because again, we were in chaos at the moment, and we just wanted to pack up and go, and that they were more than welcome to come see it as soon as we left on Tuesday. But yeah, basically those last 3 days were just filled to the brim with packing and selling things and signing things. Like Harrison had to sign for power of attorney. Of course, we wanted to say goodbye to a few key people as well. It was a blur. Okay, this is one thing I did want to mention in the video, because I mentioned it a few videos back, where there was this guy at the police station. I said it in the video, I need to give him a name, but I never ended up actually giving him a name. But he was the guy sitting beside me when I was laying on the pillow, and he's like, what, are you planning to move in here? And he was the guy who said that he spoke to his lawyers, and that they were going to help get Harrison out of jail. And again, I didn't think anything of it at the time. I just kind of thanked him, and that was that. Well, the morning after he got out, I received a message from him, and I hadn't heard from him in a couple weeks. Again, we only had that brief interaction, and it was a long text message, and it basically was just like, you're welcome. My lawyers were able to pull strings and get your husband out of jail. And he was basically saying how he owes them a big favor now, but he was really happy to help. And I just remember reading this and being like, what? Like, as far as I knew, the foreign ministry was involved, the president was involved. There were so many different plans of action happening. So when I read this text message, I was just really confused. In this text message, he specifically said, do not tell anybody about this. And that's why I was like hesitant to put it in the video. But again, I didn't say who he was. And I still don't know if he had any part in getting my husband out of jail. I'm going forward a bit here. Once we actually got back to Canada, I messaged my lawyer because I wanted to know like which one of these plans was actually the thing that ended up working and getting my husband out of jail. And she hasn't responded to me. I messaged her over a month ago now, and she hasn't replied to me. So from my lawyer, Michelle, I don't actually know. I also remember asking Harrison to ask Greg after we got home if he had any insight as to like which one of these things actually worked. And he believed it was the letters to the person up high in the government. So that was his opinion on the situation. And then of course I had family back here who were contacting members of parliament, and they were thinking that it had something to do with those people in Canada being involved. So unfortunately, I don't have a definitive answer as to how my husband got out of jail. I will never actually know which one of these things it was. It could have been a combination of all of them. I don't know. I wish I knew. It honestly doesn't matter now because he's out, but I really wish I did have that closure as to what actually happened. Okay, so jumping forward to the day that we flew home, it was a crazy long adventure of all of us. We somehow managed to get the house completely packed up, and knowing that we would probably never see it again, it was a crazy thought. We had our 3 cats with us, and it was 2 different flights. Again, jumping back to my medical issue, it was getting worse by the day at this point. I was really not doing well, so I just remember those flights being incredibly difficult and very much looking forward to seeing somebody once I got in Canada. Before we flew, my aunt was telling me at this point that the lady from the media might end up being at the airport when we showed up, and I was just saying how like both of us are not comfortable speaking to the media, and so she was possibly going to have my mom or my sister speak to them on my behalf when we arrived. However, our flights got incredibly delayed, and we got in at 2 a.m. I think, or 3 a.m. We got in very early in the morning, and luckily there was no one there from the media, and I'm not upset about that because that just added another layer to things. Once we got back to Canada, we spent the first night at Harrison's parents' house, and then the next few nights at my parents' house, and it was just like go. Again, we just got back here. We didn't have anywhere to stay. Our kids were still in 2 different homes. We had to find a rental house immediately. I think it ended up taking us a week and a half, maybe 2 weeks until we were in a rental home. Harrison contacted his work immediately and filled them in personally on everything that had happened, and he ended up starting work 1 week after we returned. I ended up going to the hospital the day after we got back because, again, I was not in a very good state. I went to the hospital where they have the top colorectal surgeons, and that's actually where I had my initial consult when I was in Canada. And so I was in Emerge that day. The colorectal surgeons weren't able to see me, but the gastroenterologist on call wanted to admit me. And I, again, because of the fact that I knew that this would all be paid out of pocket, was very much not interested in being admitted if I didn't have to be. So in the end, he ended up giving me a prescription for a localized steroid product to see if that would help, and that the colorectal surgeon team would get back to me pretty soon. Long story short, that local steroid medication did end up helping. It helped tremendously, and a few weeks later I did meet with the colorectal surgeon. In that meeting is where I found out that I basically have another surgery in my future. So again, when I was in the hospital in Nicaragua, I thought by choosing permanent ostomy that would be my only surgery, but it's not the case. So apparently I still am a candidate for a J pouch at this point. You have 1 year after surgery to kind of make that decision to have that surgery, because after that you lose the ability to use the muscles down there basically. So I do still have that option, which was shocking to me. However, if I choose not to do the J pouch, there still is 1 more surgery to remove the rectum, like I said, and kind of sew things up permanently. So either way, I have another surgery within the next year, and I will be meeting in the fall with my doctor and making a decision then. I'm still very much leaning towards keeping the permanent ostomy, but again, that could be a whole nother video. But luckily the medication so far is keeping me well, so I am really grateful for that. I am in a good spot until I have the next surgery. So yeah, I think that's really it for the story. We are all in counseling. I know people have been asking about that, and yes, myself and my husband and my children are all in counseling after everything that we've been through. We're doing okay. We're doing okay, and we are so eternally grateful for all of the love and support and everybody who has supported us in this entire journey and continue to support us. We are just forever grateful. And like I said in a previous video, I think I might film one more video after this. I mean, the story is over now, but there's been a lot of questions throughout this series, and I thought it'd be better just to sit down and address at least the ones I feel comfortable addressing all in one video. And my friend Nicole has offered to be there to kind of support me through those questions. So if you have any questions, you're welcome to leave them down below, and we'll do our best to try and answer the ones that we think we can. I know specifically the situation with Mark and the corrupt lawyers in the beginning is something I'm going to address in that video, because I did end up reaching out to him once I got back to Canada and letting him know what happened basically, and his answer was very surprising to me, and it honestly leaves me more questions than answers. So yeah, I'll be going over that for sure. I'll also be going over why I decided not to pursue the media after we got back, and kind of my decisions on why I decided to do YouTube instead. And yeah, I just have some other questions that I think I'm going to address all in a separate video. But yeah, I think that's it for this video and for the entire story. I am so glad that I am done filming this entire story, and if you watched the whole thing, thank you. It was hours, so just thank you. And yeah, I think that's it. Okay, bye.